for attending the February monthly public meeting for Minnesota Atheists. Just a really quick heads up that we are recording this meeting. So if you don't want your image potentially captured with it, then maybe just keep your video turned off. So I am going to introduce our Bill Lato. He's our, he runs Freethought House, a publishing company where he's published several books, and he's going to go ahead and introduce our presenter today.
Thanks. I'm really happy to introduce my friend Karen Shragg. Karen lives in Bloomington, Minnesota, and she holds a doctorate in critical pedagogy from the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis. She recently retired from a 35-year career working at nature centers, and she currently serves on the advisory boards of World Population Balance and Earth Overshoot. She's the author of multiple books, children's books, poetry books, and nonfiction books, including Move Upstream, A Call to Solve Overpopulation, and her most recent book, Change Our Stories, Change Our World, which is the topic of conversation today. And both books are available from us if you order directly with signed copies from Karen. The books are also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And Karen, we're really happy to have you back here to the Minnesota Atheist event. Please take it away.
Well, it's great to be here, but that's like saying it's great to be home and I'm there every day. So it's like, I wish I were all with you in person like I was. Boy, I think it's been several years now. Thanks to Bill, and thanks for the shout out for the books that you so graciously and bravely published. Before I start my more formal talk, can you all see the screen, split screen, or is that just, okay, good. And how will I toggle that? Is that something I can just say switch and it'll be switched?
Yep, just let me know when you want to move, or so for moving the PowerPoint forward, let me know.
Yeah. How about if I just say next? How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay. All right. So before I get started, there's something I just watched. I don't know if we just talked about some of us, whether you watch TV or not. I do watch a lot of films, particularly documentaries. I've always wanted to be a documentary film producer. And I've just done some very minor things. But anyway, the film I would recommend for those of you who have TVs and like movies is called The Code of Silence. And what it's about is a true story of a very Orthodox Jewish man who was abused in the mikvah, which is the Jewish, I'm Jewish, and by a person, and the rules said you can never go outside, and it was never dealt with and addressed, and it's his whole journey. And I bring that up because that's my background, not the real Orthodox Jewish background, but just to let you know where I come from as an atheist myself. And the things I'm about to go through with you come from the first chapter of the book called From Worship to Wonder. And I don't think there's anybody on this call who doesn't already know this. I don't want to say that as I'm saying these things, that these are going to be revelations to you. This is stuff, you've already lived this story. I understand that. But what I was trying to do was put this in the context of all of the stories that we need to change. And this being probably the key one, we have to quit worshiping and move to wonder. So what I'm hoping is that this little book, it's only 60 pages. It's something you can give to relatives, friends, new acquaintances, old acquaintances, and say, you know, could you read this and then we'll talk? So I was hoping to sort of conceptualize and concentrate some of the things I know you all share with me in our frustration of how the world is still run by these ancient stories that not only have no relevance today, but have damaging effect on our society. So with that, I will start, all right? So I'm calling the talk From Worship to Wonder, Change Our Stories, Change Our World. And the whole concept came to me. And originally, when Bill and I were talking, we're going to call this Where do old stories go to die? Because that's my number one question of why we can't move on from things we already know to be false and harmful. I'll give you an example of pesticides. You know, raise your hand if you think pesticides are good. You know, nobody does. Do we still use them? Yes, we do. Do they still harm? Do they still harm us? Yes, they do. And so, you know, how many? I had a friend once who was raised Catholic, and he said he always wanted to stand up in the middle of church and say, "Does anybody believe this bullshit?" You know, he always wanted to do that because he believed that people weren't there because they believed it. He believed that people were there because, well, their parents took them there and now they have to tell their children. It was more of an obligation kind of a thing. So that's the kind of question I try to answer in the 6 chapters. And then the 7th one reveals sort of a weaving together of these stories. But for today's purpose, and because this is a Minnesota Atheist group, I'm going to concentrate on the chapter From Worship to Wonder, and hope that you will be curious enough to get the book and read the rest of the chapters, which really acknowledge that there are many other stories that we have to change as well. We can talk about them in some Q&A later. What I would prefer to do is go through just 10 of these slides, and then, you know, jot down any questions you might have so that we don't kind of go off in a tangent and not finish kind of the whole story that I'd like to share with you today. So that would be great. Okay, next. There we go. So to start out with, I believe that worship, and I did select that word instead of religion because people can worship a lot of things that aren't necessarily a dogmatized religion. But I think worship, meaning giving your brain to something else, puts us in danger because God, whatever that God is, gets in the way, and it pushes critical thinking to the side. And to me, critical thinking is all about how we go after a topic from all angles. Now, I will tell you that I eked through my doctoral program in critical pedagogy, not because I didn't do well, but because I was struggling with being at a Catholic university. It was St. Thomas, and religion was never put on the table. We could criticize racism and classism and all that stuff, but the minute you came after religion and all of its long sordid history of harming people, no, you couldn't talk about that. So I thought, wait a minute, this is a doctoral I was so frustrating. And so, but I thought, I'll get the little credential and hopefully use it to my advantage, and did that. But there were many, many times I thought that we can't hurt people's feelings before actually going after something critically. Worship doesn't allow for new information to help us to adapt to new situations. And it is so harmful to keep old stories so close to us, even if they are true stories. I'll give you an example. I saw an article about the Tuskegee Airmen who were intentionally given syphilis and then intentionally not treated and never told about that. That was a government program involving a medical issue. So now fast forward to today when you're trying to get people to get the COVID vaccine and they're going, why should I trust the government? So it's really understandable that you don't believe when maybe you should believe because you're hanging on to your old stories so tightly. In this case, a very true story. Well, what if the story is just been a mythology that helped people at one time maybe get through the day? If you hang on to that story really tightly, there's damage as well. So critical thinking allows you to look at even true stories of our past and put them through the lens of what we know today. Now, I'm a naturalist. As Bill mentioned, I run a nature center, Wood Lake, for 28 years. I worked as a naturalist for 6 years before that. And I often compare us to the rest of the animal world, which is offensive to a lot of people. Little kids used to tell me, already brainwashed in their Sunday schools, we're not animals. And I said, well, you have a choice. You could be a plant, you can be a mineral, or you can be an animal. And they would look at me like, but we're people. And I think that is the first danger of this worship idea, because somehow we're special. When animals throughout history have failed to adapt, they failed to survive. And we are in the process of failing to adapt because we're not willing to let go of old stories and grab onto new ones. We always need a story, but we need one that's more realistic and more in tune to what we know. Humans have had the great benefit of insight in science and this ability to extrapolate knowledge. They know that elephants and dolphins and dogs and cats have intelligence that have them remember things, but we have the ability to write things down, look back, reflect, and we're not using that skill set. We're not really asked to. We're asked to go to a place of worship once a week, maybe more, and repeat the same things over and over and over again in this rote, and with the promise that you will be rewarded for that. And that's very dangerous, because that doesn't allow us to address and think clearly. If the worst of it, and I talk about the whole idea now, again, I grew up Jewish, so I did not grow up with the idea of the end of days. I did not grow up with the idea of that the apocalyptic, the end, is going to happen, and we just need to live our lives and not in, because somebody else is in charge. So that removal of agency is so self-sabotaging, and it makes us resist the kind of change we really need to do, because we're not in charge. Okay, next. At its best, at its worst, worship is forced upon others with threats of genocide. I know, because I'm a graduate of 10 years of Hebrew school and many years of Saturday school, all throughout my elementary and high school years. I know Jewish history pretty well. And I do know that there's a saying, why did Jews play so many violins? They said, because it was an instrument you could run with, meaning that we were persecuted all over the planet. The first Jews coming to this country from Brazil, because the Portuguese followed them there and kicked them out again. I mean, this whole idea of we can't be who we want to be is because you weren't like us. You're not the main dominant religion. That's at its worst. At its best, what happens is, and I'm going to need to move this down a little bit. There we go. What happens is that at its best, it allows the dismissal of science, which can lead to death, as in the case of Christian scientists who don't believe medical doctors because God is in charge. I'm sure some of you might even come from that faith, or people have, but the idea that God's in charge is really taken to the nth degree with that particular denomination, because I know my father, as a doctor, had to deal with some Christian scientists who they would bring a sick child to them, and they said, well, we want you to treat, but you can't use any medicine and you can't use any surgery. And my dad goes, well, why are you tying my hands? Oh, because we believe God is in charge. And so that's another way that religion destroys our ability to progress as a species. I mentioned this once already, but I think it needs repeating, that so much of the mythology around COVID itself and the vaccine is because it's so much easier today with social media to make sure that people are confused with all kinds of different quote unquote truths. And it's so damaging, because the science can hardly find its way to the front page of the newspaper, because somebody wants to talk about this company or that company, and they'll take one example and make sure that it's extrapolated to include everything else. And meanwhile, the pandemic, as of today, will have taken 500,000 Americans. And the tragedy in the misinformation that has been responsible for a lot of those deaths is what I think we should all reflect on as what we're talking about here. Is that the whole idea of worship is to say, well, they said, and therefore it must be true. And that's what I mean by worship. They said. It doesn't have to be, you know, Islam, or it doesn't have to be Christianity or Judaism or any ism. But the idea that I'm going to give you my heart and my head, and you are in charge and you tell me what to do, that is the danger. Even if it's your own people, and especially if it's your own people, because there might be an uncle and aunt that you totally love and respect, but they might say, oh no, you can't do this, you can't do that. I've been a political activist for a long time. I've been into neighborhoods where I was trying to convince people that the candidate that I wanted was for the best of them. And I had people saying, well, you know, my pastor says that that person is against abortion, therefore I can't vote for them. And I said, well, here's the deal. That's probably not going to come up in the next election. So you have to kind of very, very gently tease out all of their beliefs. And to me, at the core of it all is to say, you have to quit believing somebody else knows better than you do. Give people back their intelligence, which I do believe they have. Okay, next. Worship is a story that needs to end because we've attached too much power to them. We haven't said they're the end all be all. Oh my goodness, you know, I've heard people say, you know, oh, you know, when somebody's dating someone, are they blank? What faith are they? And then say, you know what? They're nice and good people. And the idea that we value it so highly has been also to our detriment. Just because our ancestors were our ancestors doesn't mean that we need to honor everything they believed, because we have so much more information now. We have so many more discoveries now. I think we can look back to a time when we were much more ecologically in the Earth's parameters of how to live. But when you attach goodness to following 10 commandments, you aren't engaged in the bigger picture. And as I say here, genocide has been the path of those so attached to their own version of righteousness that others must die to keep the integrity of that story going. And that pretty much says it all. Next. The Western world's dominant religions separate us from nature. We need a more indigenous approach to our relationship to the natural world. If you've been following any of the fights for the stopping of the pipeline that's going through indigenous land and leaking oil on it, you can see that there's still an incredible spirit left in a community so devastated by our telling them that they had the wrong religion, that they needed to go to boarding schools, and that whole awful history of what we've done to indigenous people since basically Columbus. And yet they really had a much more land-based culture, much more idea that we're not in charge of nature, and that if we break nature's rules, we will be broken. And getting back to those stories, I think is of great importance, because we know by any measurement, we're headed off a cliff of collapse as far as what's going to happen with our water cycles and our energy and our pollution and the species that we're destroying. All of those things come from our story, and they come from dominant patriarchal religion, which basically puts humans in the center of the world instead of as part of the web of life. We have to let that go. I mean, how do you do it? if I had that, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on the cover of Time magazine today. But I would be more than happy to entertain that discussion of how do you attach religion to the destruction of the planet. I think that's where the direction needs to be in these stories is you can continue believing what you want to believe when you show me that it's doing any good in the world. It has not made people more kind. It has not made people more understanding. It has not made us more, it's not made us more ecologically sane. It's made us more ecologically insane. It's permitted Wall Street and corporations to run the world because we do worship the almighty dollar more than we worship anything of value like forests and prairies, etc. Next, just have to take a sip of. To replace worship with wonder, and I will give a cautionary note to this. I do have forgive my English here, but I do have a thing that says same shit, different robe. And what I mean by that is just because you redress your spirituality with different language, it still can resemble worship in that that can become dogmatized very quickly. So what I mean by wonder is much more important to talk about here because we already know that when we think we're all powerful, we end up with autocrats and kings who think we are in charge. It's important to place humans in the world properly, which is really, there's a lot of great mystery still to us. And that's, no matter how much they can describe why and how butterflies migrate, it's still amazing. And the songs of birds, I'm just still learning as a naturalist that chickadees' brains are bigger than other birds of their size because they hide food in the fall and they need to be able to remember where it is. I think those are fascinating. And it gives me great sense of awe and wonder and joy. But that wonder and joy isn't something that comes with it a lot of baggage, in fact, it might help me feed the chickadees and take care of them better and not put pesticides on my yard. There are benefits to wonder and there are detriments to worship is really the main point of this particular slide. I do think we need to redefine what sacred means. And in my experience, every time we make something that is a written word of 2,000, 3,000 years ago sacred, or we make a building sacred, we really do a lot of damage because people fight so many wars over, was that where Jesus preached and we want to have that behind our border? And they say, no, we want it behind our border. And their wars are so started over these kinds of holy places. I think holy places have not done much to help the world. And so the idea of sacred to me is being in a rainforest for the first time is a sacred thing. And then I want to protect that. And that helps us. Trees, as we all know, are the lungs of the world. Trees are the habitat of so many fantastic species, which we're losing by the thousands every day. So putting sacred in a proper location where it can do us some good rather than this book is sacred and if you say anything bad about it, you will be killed. No one coming from another planet, not that I believe in aliens or anything, but would look down at that and see that as anything but an absolute crazy. It's just insane to say that, if this were a book, although I'd like this to become your Bible, but it was like, oh, you can't desecrate it. Do you know that in the Jewish faith, if you accidentally drop the Torah, you have to fast for 40 days. I think you can eat at night. But the idea that book is holier than a forest is to me at the key of what I mean by the difference of worship and wonder. Next. I don't think we should admonish the idea of ritual that can be addressed with wonder, although some rituals can be so ridiculous. In the Orthodox community, you'll see that if you're right-handed, you are supposed to put on your clothes with your right hand. In some societies, the hand you use to use the bathroom cannot be the hand used to shake somebody. And I think with soap, there shouldn't be any difference in that. There's so many ridiculous, I list them in this chapter. I think you might be amused by them in some kind of crazy way, but you know, all the different rules about, I know my grandmother, for example, if a fork touched meat that should have only been touching milk, she would bury the fork in the backyard to clean it. I mean, these are the rituals that just are inculcated in our brains, and after a while they become normalized within our small groups. I think that with all the hardships people have been talking about that's been going on with COVID, we need rituals. Maybe that ritual is, I call my good friend every Sunday morning, and we share a cup of coffee and look at, whatever it is. We need those rituals. We need birthday rituals, planting rituals, ones that soothe us and have a purpose. And they need to be observed in a lighthearted way, because if we don't do them, we can't be punished. Like, did you cross yourself 3 times today? Whatever the ritual is becomes a obligation with no fun associated with it. And then at the end of the day, if you didn't do it, you think you're going to a place they call hell. I think tying rituals to the present moment, just as an aside, my first children's book I wrote was from Prometheus Books. Many of you may be familiar with them, out of New York. And that children's book was called A Solstice Tree for Jenny. And it was my way of telling my family that I was no longer going to celebrate the Hanukkah holiday, but that I wanted to get a live solstice tree and bring everything into the present moment, rather than attach myself to the meaning of history and things that to me were no longer very relevant. Next. So when we make God part of our culture and story, it makes it a really hard thing to change. And I think that's what the powers that be wanted when they put, God on our currency. And in 1954, when I was born, putting God in the Pledge of Allegiance. God is so ubiquitous, and that then if you don't believe, you become what Malcolm Gladwell would call the outlier. And the good thing about being an outlier is we're already so diminished by major culture. We're allowed to have a louder voice because we're not worried that somebody at church is going to do something to us or whatever. So being an outlier can be to our advantage, and it has helped different people all the time. I refer to Malcolm Gladwell's book called The Outliers. I'm a big fan of his sociological perspective on why we are the way we are and how we could be better. But the whole idea that it's so much a part of our world, it becomes unquestioned. And those of us in this meeting today we question, we don't believe, we are critical of just assuming that everything is about God. I mean, I'm guessing if some of you are sports fans that you don't watch the first part of a game, which always has something, we're pledging our allegiance, and we don't like pledging our allegiance because our allegiance needs to be earned. And that's part of what being, I think, an atheist is all about. You have to earn my allegiance. I don't pledge it to you, and that means I turn off my brain. Believing in a supernatural being has been a solace for a lot of people, but if people stop and think for a moment, they have a very poor record of saving us from disasters, although they always get credit for the dog that's floating on a log, even though the whole house and the people were killed. It's like, oh, God saved the dog. It's like if anyone had any critical mind, they might say, wait a second here, if God saved the dog, why couldn't he save the people in the house? And that's an age-old argument for atheism, but it's still a good one. Next. So I added up, did some research and found out that since civilization had begun, we have killed nearly 200 million people just in the idea that, you know, in the name of God. So these are religious wars, from everything from the pogroms to the mostly against the people I associate with, mostly the Jews. You know, whether it was the pogroms or whether there was the Crusades from Spain and then the Crusades from Portugal. It's about hatred, and it's about hatred of the other, and there is no morality in that. And so we have to pin on religion, I think, their duty to literally apologize for all of the pain that they continue to this day to cause. Just because I'm not a member of your tribe doesn't mean my tribe needs to be killed. So we have that, I think, that opportunity to say, you need to, you know, make what I would call religious reparations, repair what you've done, and then deflate that power. How many presidents would be elected if they were an atheist? At least not for a long, long time, if ever. Next. You know, you've probably all read or at least heard of the book, Good Without God by Greg Epstein. I have it on my shelf. And I want to also reclaim the goodness in people who are not believers. I really like that the Minnesota Atheists, along with a lot of other free thinkers, routinely work at food shelves and help other people to demonstrate that even without someone telling us from above what we must do, we just know that the golden rule applies to everyone. Be good to each other, be good to your planet. Now get out of the pew and go do something that's really important. We really have to divorce ourselves from those stories of supernatural, so we can once again make the world a more secular and sane place. In the secular is a lot of sanity. And what I mean by secular, I mean the critical thinking secular world of not just not doing something, like I don't go to church, but what I do is I believe in justice. I believe in taking care of the planet. Those are beliefs, and those are a kind of sacred and beliefs that are something to really champion and be proud of. Because the only thing I don't like about the word atheist, it means I don't believe in maybe something supernatural, but I'm a strong believer in the natural world. Religion's promise of teaching us how to get along has really failed miserably. It's probably just had the opposite effect. And there's a lot of, historical, if you know much about the Indian Wars that happened, the longest war ever on American territory, the 60 Years War was between different Indian groups, Comanche and Apache, and they all fought each other to the death until there were not enough left. And then back in the 70s, they all decided to come together for the American Indian movement. But they really saw each other as other, and probably due to a lot of the pressure from all the Europeans coming and taking their land in the East. And then they were forced to fight. But fighting and believing that your people need defending at all times is probably part of our DNA. And I do believe we can evolve beyond that. Next. There he is. End of slideshow. So the only thing I wanted to end with was reading you what the chapters are in the book, so you're enticed to want to read it. It'll just take an afternoon. It's from greed to need. We go over why we have to quit being so greedy. Thank you, Bill Gates, and your $63 million home. From limitless to limited reviews a lot of the things I talked about in the idea that humans and their footprint are way too many on our planet, causing all kinds of destruction. From synthetic to natural, getting back to nature and away from our phones. From other to us, I've touched on that a bit today, but the idea that you are different from me is really at the heart of so much religion. Chapter 6 is from the mindless to the mindful. The idea of it comes back to the critical part of how we need to be more mindful of what we're doing and aware. If you do any form of Eastern tradition, yoga or qigong or tai chi, you know that they're always talking about being mindful. Don't just raise your arm, know where your arm is, know where your thoughts go, know they have meaning. And then the last one is kind of weaving it all together and where I think we should go from here. So with that, I will entertain any questions or comments.
George, it looks like you have your hand up.
No, that's applause.
Oh.
Was that one?
Thank you.
Was that the sound of one hand clapping? I don't know.
No, I applaud. I'm applauding too. Thank you. That was really, really great. I did have a question. You were talking about, let's see, I made a note here, so let me find the note. You were talking about the idea of people exceptionalism, when at the very beginning, we were saying that just the minute we start saying that we're not animals, that we're exceptional because we're humans, moves us into this idea that we have this, and later you were talking about some other things that helped me think about this. We have this separate and parallel track of creation that is next to genetics. And so you talk about things that are in the DNA, but then we have things that are in the stories that we've told and in the memes and in the structures that we've built around, say, sitting around a fire and telling stories or dancing or, sliding a little bit away from the fire to have what some of us might call sex. But all these different things that are related to building a memeplex or building a series of understandings that allow for language and mathematics and everything. And these parallel life things, these things that are moving together are one being the creatures, the human creatures, that now we all put on clothing. It's like amazing. Why do we all put on clothing? It's not necessarily to keep us warm, although this morning when I went out, I put on less clothing than I have in the past several days. I guess the question is this, as in your research, in your kind of learning research, is this about curiosity and cognition and staying flexible of brain, staying flexible of neurology and neurocircuitry? Is this kind of building of these parallel life structures? Is it to help us learn to get better? I'm not saying that there's necessarily progress of our evolution. We're not necessarily evolving towards something that's better, but we're evolving towards something that's different. And now that we have this ability to talk to each other and share through language and all the other, writing and everything, does that allow us to actually progress?
I would say the potential is there. What we have to keep asking ourselves is, how is it working for us? How is what we believe today working for us? And I'm going to give you an analogy. I think when you look at a landscape, you see a story. If you see a golf course, that means somebody somewhere we know in Scotland, decided that this was a good use of land, that we are going to play this game and it's going to be fun and we're going to have tournaments. And I mean, I am a certifier of golf. I don't really play, but I've been a certifier of golf courses for the Audubon International program. And when you open one of their sheds and you see the chemical, not just the chemicals, but the machinery just to make the grass perfect for this game, to me, it shows a story that's quite powerful, isn't it? The Augusta, I know someone who works to manage the Augusta golf course for the Masters tournament. And you know that nobody plays that course except for one day a year. And there are people who go there months ahead to make sure every blade of grass is perfect. That's an incredibly powerful story that makes a whole lot of things work. But let me just tell you a story. And I want to talk to you about this engagement. If we're doing it right, we should constantly be throwing in more and more information and come out with the best answer. I'll give you an example. Those of you who live in Minneapolis, or it's true in St. Paul, will note that the architecture has shifted to these tall glass building structures. We know that the stadium, whatever you think of the stadium, was built with a tall glass structure. And we know a couple of things. We know that glass is terrible for insulation, terrible for insulation, and we know it's terrible for birds unless you put this particularly textured glass on it. We know that for sure. But why do we still have buildings that are killing birds every spring during migration, every fall? Because the dominant story is beauty and cheapness. It was cheaper to build it with glass, therefore we do it. And these other stories are a subset. And so to me, it's a struggle of which story gets to dominate. We can still want the cheapest, but boy, we're going to spend more to save the birds. That's going to take some ethical struggle, some moral struggle. So what I'm trying to get at is our ability, we can use our ability to think, talk, and engage to make the world better or worse. Because people can also talk about, you know, the late, not so great Rush Limbaugh just died, and he used his microphone to make the world a worse place by making people hate each other more. And so I think it's pretty benign. I think it's how we use it. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I kind of have a follow-up, because when you're talking about living in right relation with the earth, you mentioned the idea that we are, if you can show me religion is doing something good, then, I might consider it, but it's nothing. It hasn't done anything. It's given us slavery. It's given us private property. It's given us Wall Street. It's given us all these things. And so it has become a battle of ideas as opposed to the physical kind of trying to be the survival of the fittest. And so many people misunderstand the idea of survival of the fittest too, because it's not about survival of the fittest individual in a group. It's about survival of the groups that are most able to cooperate.
Right.
And so aren't we really trying to figure out how to build a commons or rebuild a commons and a common ownership?
Well, we should be, but I would also think that I also wish that current day religious leaders would realize how they're being used to justify Wall Street's annihilation of things. They'll say, you need to believe in Jesus, and therefore we're going to take you off the land so we can go get your land. I mean, it's an excuse to leverage power and money and control. It isn't about God. I don't think today it's really about a God. I really think it's about using that story to gain power for those people who are in charge today. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read the book called When Corporations Rule the World, but corporations are very good at taking what people think they're about and using it to their advantage. So I think the very humbly religious people aren't the people I'm really afraid of. I'm afraid of the people who, Donald Trump wasn't a religious man. He just knew how to say the words that the religious people wanted to hear. And I think it's two different things, but we have to really kind of understand that worship of Wall Street is a kind of religion on its own.
I have
question and comment. Hi, Karen. Steve Peterson from
Hi,
Minnesota.
Steve.
So when you first talked and said that you were going to St. Thomas, I
Yeah.
thought probably about the same time there was a teacher at St. Catherine's called Dale McGowan,
Okay.
who was a music teacher, and he wanted to try how far tolerance would go. He was a free thinker, member of Minnesota Atheists. He started putting up Freethought sayings every day. And they got out of his office, went down the hall, nobody said a word. He invited Dan Barker to speak, rented an auditorium, and that went right up until they were about ready to start, and they shut it down and threw him off campus. And so they went and Dan spoke down at on the Mississippi River Boulevard. And he wrote a book called Calling Bernadette's Bluff about the experience of
That
college.
sounds familiar. Sounds familiar. Yeah, it is. It was astonishing to me that they went so far as to not even acknowledge the name of when I did graduate, and I did march just because I was like, hey, why not make my parents proud, you know? And they didn't even acknowledge that there was such a program as critical pedagogy, that they got up there and they just said, oh, these are people from EdPsych. No, we weren't. So they changed the name, and I mean, I literally called the dean and yelled at her, and I got flowers from the dean the next day apologizing. You know, I said, hey, I paid all my bills and you put the wrong name on my diploma. So, you know, I think you say, I'm just going to go, it's a university, right? Well, they have their own agenda, and agendas are not news, and agendas are not education, and agendas are not free thinking. You know, hence the word free.
Yeah. So one other comment that I was thinking of, you had something about religion being robes of covered with the same robe type of analogy.
Same
And
different robe.
yeah, correct. So a real life experience when Trump came into power, of course, after 9/11, there was a lot of backlash against Muslims, and that carried over into a whole different realm. So people got terrified of Sharia law in the United States, of which we're so far away from that, except nobody paid attention to Christian nationalists, which now have the control of the courts. And I would talk to people about this, and I go, well, you have Christian nationalists, which is exactly what Sharia law is, just with a different religion. Absolutely would not agree with me. And I'm thinking, what are you kidding? Your kids today of the future may not have reproductive rights.
Yeah, another way of saying that is your brand of poison is still poison.
Yeah, I thought your analogy was really, that's what I thought of when it came up.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Looks like Heidi has a question.
Thanks. Just a quick question. Do you challenge people on facts or stories in real time, or because I've sort of started challenging my family. I'm a relatively new deconverted atheist, and my mom really didn't let us ever have any discussion, but I'm challenging people on the facts these days. Like they're like parts of the Bible, for Christian Bible, are simply not accurate.
I would recommend using humor.
Okay.
I would recommend just, having facts kind of in your pocket that you pull out with humor when you do that. And what I like to say is that if you looked at the stories that current are accepted as very normal beliefs, and you really examine them, they'd be laughable. How many of you are familiar with Sarah Silverman, the comedian? So she has this thing that I think is really cool. She goes, the only reason we think Scientology is so weird is because it's the newest thing on the block, and we know people named Ron. So calling God Ron seems weird to us. Calling him Yahweh, well, we don't know anyone named Yahweh, so that's okay. And so it's funny. It's really funny. And Ricky Gervais, how many of you are fans or familiar with Ricky Gervais? He's a big free thinker. And Ricky Gervais says there are 4,200 gods that are acknowledged in the world. I just believe in one less than you do. And that's funny. It's got a twist to it that gets people to think. So yes, I challenge them and I try to do it with humor, because a battering ram only makes your wrist hurt and them bruised. It doesn't work.
Anybody else have questions? It's such a great speech. There's so many things that got me thinking as you were talking.
Well, I'm
Are there other
glad to hear it.
questions?
I know you guys are so knowledgeable. So you're a great audience, because I didn't have to start at the very beginning, you know.
Are there other questions out there?
Helen, you have your hand up.
Yes. It always interests me to note how many stories are very dismissive of and derogatory of women, and in so many religions. You did note a few of them. I'm partway through the book. You did note a few of them, and it always blows my mind, as someone for whom feminism was one of my roads to atheism, and the extreme anti-feminism of the Catholic Church is one of the main reasons that I got out of it. And it just blows my mind how many of those stories are very misogynistic. And I mean, even if you break the planet up by how many different religions there are, you know, you're still talking almost half the population identifies as female. And it just blows my mind how those have been allowed to persist. I mean,
Absolutely. And the issue that, you know, that this issue I work on a lot, but I work up mostly on the overpopulation issue. And you can attribute a lot of overpopulation to patriarchal religion, which makes women be just basically baby factories. I mean, when you watch this show, I hope you'll watch it, The Code of Silence. And this woman pumped out 17 children in the name of God. And yet, you know, she's, you know, intentionally perfectly happy, because I think she thinks she did something extremely important, you know, bringing back the people who were killed in the Holocaust. And there's a lot of stories around that. I get that. But absolutely. I mean, if someone's saying, to you, well, come to my church. By the way, I have a quick story if you have time. I would say, how do you treat your women? That would be my first question. Do they have to wear certain things? Can they be clergy? And I've been told by people, I think it was a woman who belonged to Calvary Lutheran, and I had to go there to do some talk or some nature talk, and I just couldn't run out of there fast enough. It was just this feeling of, and I said, I don't think gay people are welcome here. She goes, we welcome them. They can't be clergy, but we welcome them. I said, you know, that's just not good enough for me, you know. So we can use this to our advantage. We can put let's put the mirror back on them, and they say, why don't you join us? I say, sure, but I have a few criteria. How do you treat your women? How do you treat people of diversity? Do you really live up to your own rhetoric? And if they can't live up to their own rhetoric, why would I want to join? I mean, there's other reasons I wouldn't want to join, but why don't we put that first? I think we should put belief in the back burner when we challenge religion. The woman who asked me, Heidi, asked me first, instead of talking about belief so much, talk about the reality of these churches. How diverse are they? How are they really helping? Now, there are some churches who are doing a phenomenal job, but at the end of the day, somebody else is in charge, and I'm still not going to sit in the pew. Okay. I had someone good friend bring me to a Methodist church and say, oh, Karen, you've got to come. And they were sitting in a circle, and they were playing guitars, and he thought I would just join the Methodists, you know, immediately, because he showed me, we went to this little corridor, we looked at this big, I think it was United Methodist downtown, and he showed me this big congregation, and there was choir on one side and the priest. He says, we don't do that. He goes, we sit in a circle. I said, yeah, you changed a lot of the aesthetics that are probably better, but you haven't let go of the story. And so we have to be careful that just like anything, that the changes that are made are just at the end of the day, superficial changes. So absolutely. I mean, that's a great road to atheism, is how they've treated women. But to be honest, if there was a group of women and a woman was in charge and they made me do all these rituals and they said, first you have to bow to the east and then the west, I'd go right for the southern door and run out the door too. So, you know, it's just a matter of getting too, you know, here's what I say, you know, everyone has beliefs. Everyone sitting here has beliefs, whether it's a belief in, you know, spring is the best, whatever it is. And if we hold on to it like a pen, you hold on to it gently, it's a writing tool. It's when you hold on it too tightly, it becomes a weapon. And we have weaponized our beliefs to the degree where a lot of us just go, I'm done. I don't even want any part of it because I feel it's guilt by association. I don't know if you do, but I go, I just can't sit there and pretend or okay. I remember my dad when he was young, he could sing in the choir, but he couldn't say the name Jesus for the Christmas song. You know, I just can't do that. I can't sit in the piano. I can't do number 5. I could maybe, maybe I'm a purist that way. I'm not sure.
You have your hand up?
Yeah, I have a comment. I have some cousins who are very dear to me, but they're also quite fundamentalist Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of my cousin saying atheists have no hope. And I didn't take offense to that. I just figured she was just ignorant. And I told her that that's not true. I have hope. I have hope in human goodness and human imagination and human creativity and our wonderment for the universe and our ability to ask questions about the universe. And she was just flummoxed by that. And I just thought that was, I was kind of flummoxed by her response. And I just thought, you know, the assumptions that people make about atheists that these fundamentalist Christians are inculcated with are really really disturb me. Like we have no morals because we don't believe in God, and I consider myself a very moral, ethical person.
Right. Well, that's a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up. I think we owe it to each other to ask. Don't assume. What do they say? An ass, you know, assume means you make an ass out of you and me. You know, that's what assumptions are. A Black person would really like you to ask them, you know, are they religious? Are they Muslim? Are they poor? Don't assume. It's very admonishing and diminishing of our humanity to assume anything. I think it's a fair question to say to you, you know, as an atheist, do you have hope? That's very fair. What's not fair is to assume you don't have hope. Mm-hmm. It's in the assumption that is negates your humanity. I think it's absolutely important that we ask questions of each other. And my answer to that would be, you know what gets rid of hope is rigid thinking. And I've seen rigid thinking in almost every religion that has been followed to the letter of its law. And that tells me there's no wiggle room for awareness and openness and enlightenment. The Enlightenment brought us mathematics. It brought us all kinds of wonderful things. And as you know, the pendulum keeps swinging. We go from the Dark Ages to something more enlightened, then we go backwards in time. And that would be the thing I said, you know, please don't assume anything. And it's really important. I'll give you just just in my own life, having come from a Jewish background, and my husband was raised Catholic, and we live a secular lifestyle. But one day when we were first together, I found a Christmas wreath on our door, and I was like, a Christmas wreath. You know, I had this religious attachment to that. You know, I didn't grow up with that, and therefore it was bad. And I had all these assumptions, and I just said, tell me, does that wreath have any meaning to you? And I'm going to cry when I say this. His sister died the year we met. And he said, she gave that to me. And now I put it up myself because I know the story behind it. I don't assume it has meaning other than the meaning I give it. And I think that's so important in this discussion, is that we grab onto our humanity and say, I deserve your respect of at least asking me what I believe, why I believe it, and not assuming it. And I think that I hope this book gives people sort of a footing. If you're shy or introverted and you know what you're thinking, but you do not know how to say it, I'm hoping my book gives you some language to use, because you deserve respect and you deserve to have your thoughts known. Agreeing with them is a whole nother level, but we're not even at the level of respect.
George, did you have your hand up at one point?
No.
Anybody else have questions?
Well, I want to really thank Freethought House Press, Bill, and I hope that all of you continue in your pursuit of your own truth. And thank you very much for being so patient with me today. I hope I didn't babble too much.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Round of
Applause.
applause. Round of applause. There we go.